Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2006 biographical film Factory Girl. Now, I gotta be honest here. I did not expect much from this film. In fact, I expected this to be pretty bad considering how low of a rating it gets from a lot of other critics. And also due to the fact that it's not really the kind of film that I'm usually that big on, but I kind of liked it. Now, I'm not going to say that I loved it, but I thought it was all right. I thought it was okay and decent for what it is. It's directed by George Hickenlooper, and before I go any further discussing the film, I want to give a special shout out to Phil for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. A link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, the director in George Hickenlooper, he did like a few other narrative films before this, but not really anything that much of substance. He was more known for his documentaries. He actually started out his career doing the documentary Heart of Darkness, which was about the making of Apocalypse Now, which is actually pretty good. I thought that was a pretty solid documentary. And you can kinda see the low budget documentary filmmaker sort of roots here when it comes to his direction in this. There are moments with his framing where it's honestly pretty, uh, ingenious and very creative and very, skilled, but then there's other moments where the framing or the shot selection or the camera work is just not really on the same level. So there's a lot of inconsistencies when it comes to the direction for this. So there's moments in it where it will be very slick and stylish and genuinely look like something that belongs in a movie theater. Then there's other moments where it looks like it's a Lifetime movie of the week. So that's kind of what my main issue is with the film when it comes to the directing is just its inconsistency overall. Like there are moments where it'll wow you and actually has some dazzling usage of framing or color or slow-mo or other different sort of techniques and different camera angles and different POVs and other camera techniques. But then there's other moments where it's just very flat and just not really that energetic and not that lively and not that interesting. So the direction is a mixed bag. The screenplay by Captain Mausner is also a mixed bag. So here's my issue with this script. It's a tale of two halves. And I've said this and before when it comes to other films that I've discussed on this channel. And I think it's the best way to discuss screenplays that are like this, where you have a first half that is considerably less engaging and honestly not anywhere near as good as the second half. And this is one of those screenplays. The first half, which is just establishing Eddie Sedgwick and her collaborations with Andy Warhol and throwing in a little bit of character depth when it comes to some of these different characters, is honestly Lifetime Hallmark movie level writing. It really is. And it's honestly pretty boring, for, like, the first 40 minutes. The only time you really kinda get, interested or intrigued by anything is due to some of the performances by the cast, maybe a stylish shot or 2 by the director. But other than that, like, there's not a lot when it comes to the narrative, when it comes to story that's really that interesting or engaging for the first 40 minutes. When you get past that point, though, and Eddie Sedgwick is succumbing to drug addiction and dealing with the fallout of her life choices and losing her inheritance because she spent it all, and trying to go to Warhol for help, and he doesn't want anything to do with her because she's no longer beautiful and is no longer serving a purpose for him. So he just doesn't consider her to be anything special anymore, and he ostracizes her. And you have this other stuff going on with her relationship with this musician, which is clearly supposed to be Bob Dylan, but I guess they didn't want to get into any sort of hot water, so Bob Dylan wasn't really a character in this, but it's some fictional musician that's inspired by Bob Dylan. But regardless, there's definitely something a little bit more involving when it comes to the two of them starting to have a relationship with one another, while she's still trying to be friends with and still collaborate with Andy Warhol. And she just continually spirals farther and farther down, and the very gritty, raw, and realistic portrayal of this superstar and Eddie Sedgwick, who was this big name in the art crowd because she was doing all these film projects with Andy Warhol, and Andy Warhol really liked her and thought she was something unique and special and one of a kind, and a genuine star. When all of that fades away and what you're left with is a very damaged woman who uh, was abused when she was young by her father, and has all these other issues and this extra baggage, and now it's all out in the open, and you see it in ways that are unflinching and very real. That's when the film starts to become less superficial and starts to become a lot more compelling overall when it comes to the script. Um, that's that's honestly one of the main reasons why I like the film, is when it's showing you this seedy side of Andy Warhol, for instance, the side of him where he used and abused his subjects and the people that he uh, befriended and supposedly couldn't live without, but it was really just all talk by him. He said the right things to these people and got them to float around his orbit, so to speak. But once they outlived their usefulness, or once they were no longer a fad, he dropped them like a bad habit. And it really doesn't pull any punches when it comes to showing Andy Warhol in a very low point, almost like he is some kind of vampire who's sucking the life and the energy out of these different subjects that he's decided to pick for his various projects. And you have Andy Warhol and the way that he's portrayed, which is very drastically different from how he's portrayed in the first half of the film. And then you also have Eddie Sedgwick and how she's portrayed, and some of the other characters who are a part of Warhol's orbit. Now, there is a framing device that I felt was kind of interesting as well, where the writers, they set things up, and I say writers because Captain Mausner also co-wrote the story along with Aaron Richard Golb, who was one of the producers for the film. And so the script, it has an interesting framing device, which has an older Edie who is speaking to somebody at a facility. I think it's like either a mental health facility or rehab facility, or a facility that does a bit of both. And she's talking to this doctor or this therapist and telling her side of the story from a newfound perspective in terms of a woman who now realizes the mistakes that she made with Andy Warhol, realizes that she became too codependent on him, and realizes that she should have been with the musician. She should have went with him when he offered that opportunity, and she feels a lot of remorse for that. And it is an interesting framing device because it shows an older Eddie, and then you'll have these flashbacks that are deal with her when she was younger and her time at the factory with Andy Warhol. And it's definitely though something that's a bummer. It's a bummer story and a bummer film. I mean, the ending of the film reveals the sad truth and the sad reality that once Edie got out of that treatment facility, and even married another man whom she met there, she immediately relapsed and then died of a drug overdose. And the last scene in the film is actually a pretty bit of twisted, dark stuff where it showcases an interview with Andy Warhol uh, pretty soon after Edie's death, and this interviewer is talking to him about Edie, and he's just nonchalant and nonplussed and just doesn't seem to really even care about Edie. And they mention that the interviewer mentions that Edie died recently, and Warhol's just like, "Oh, it was so long ago." You know, he had no remorse, no emotion, no, I didn't feel a dang thing whatsoever when the interviewer clarified that she's dead. And you could say, honestly, because of how Warhol made her feel like she was codependent on him and then he abandoned her, that could have led to her death because she became codependent on him. She already had a pre existing mental illness, and he took advantage of that and took advantage of her and allowed her to continually get shot up with drugs and really never did anything about that. And so when she was no longer able to use her inheritance or her family fortune to be able to fuel her drug habit, now she's doing desperate things in order to be able to get her fix. And it it really is one of those things where if Warhol actually genuinely did care about Edie, he would have actually tried to help her more, but he didn't give a shit. He only cared about the fame and the publicity that he would get from working with her for a brief amount of time, because she was so ahead of the game when it comes to her fashion sense and her style and he just felt like that was something that was just so fresh and cool and incredible at the time. But then once it's no longer fashionable, then and she's no longer beautiful because she's just completely a total mess now because of her codependency issues and her drug use. He doesn't want to touch her with a 10-meter cattle prod. So yeah, I did appreciate the way that it just ended things by just showcasing Warhol exactly who he really was. The man was, a lot of ways you could consider a brilliant artist, but he was a awful person. He was a total dick. He really was. He goes around and comments on other guys' cocks, and the guy himself is one giant cock face. Um, but he's a talented one. But yeah, I did appreciate that they weren't trying to pull any punches and weren't trying to make him into some sort of sympathetic figure or anything. And told the harsh reality and the dark truth of Andy Warhol and what he did to maintain his fame and how he used and abused people who worked for him in his factory. And it's not what I would consider, though, a great script because of the things that I mentioned. The first half is just kind of bland and dull, except for maybe a couple scenes here or there. The second half is a lot better when she's spiraling out of control and Warhol is showing his true nature. But there's still a lot of stuff involving some side characters that doesn't really feel like it goes anywhere. Definitely affects the pacing and the overall interest in the film as a whole. It's tonally kind of off at points too. Like I don't know if it's trying to be a satire at certain points or it's just trying to be something completely different. I'm not entirely 100% sure most of the time, and definitely could have used a little bit of levity to kind of not really outweigh, but balance out some of the really heavy stuff when it comes to the script and its subject matter. But I still felt like for the most part it was a okay script, an okay story. But in all honesty, the most consistently great things about Factory Girl is the performances, mainly by the two main cast members. Sienna Miller is Eddie Sedgwick and Guy Pearce is Andy Warhol. Like Sienna Miller was fantastic. She was excellent as Eddie. Like initially I felt like, oh, she's kind of got this weird off-kilter sing-songy delivery. Almost sounds like she's on something almost all the time. And that's because that's the reality of it. Eddie really was under the influence for a good chunk of her life. And she was going through one day after the next on some combination of alcohol and drugs and other things that'll keep her up and bring her down. And that the way that she is speaking when it's dealing with the scenes from that time period of her life when she was really heavy into drug use and alcohol, it's very convincing. She sounds like she's high or she sounds like she's inebriated. And it's because that's the reality of it. And it's a very nuanced and in-depth role. And Miller, she did a magnificent job with it. Definitely one of her best performances as an actress. Uh, Showcased a lot of range with this one. She does a good job playing the party girl, but also does a great job playing the girl who's got her act together and cleaned up and reminiscing about her troubled past and feeling remorse for her life decisions. And when she has to be really intense when it comes to her emotions, she brings it and then some. And not just the waterworks. Like she brings the everything else that comes with that too. Some very believable facial expressions and movement when it comes to her body, and it's just a very authentic and very strong performance by Sienna Miller. And Guy Pearce was also excellent as Andy Warhol. He was amazing. In a lot of ways, it was almost like he played his role like he was doing a take on David Bowie's character in The Hunger, just this vampiric, larger than life figure. And yeah, he's definitely very flamboyant, but that's precisely who Andy Warhol was. And there's a certain darkness that he brings to the role that is just really good. And there's a lot for him to sink his teeth into, and you could just tell that he really gave this role his all to the point where there are scenes where Guy is almost unrecognizable when he's playing Andy Warhol. I think honestly, his performance is the best that I've seen in a film featuring an actor trying to play Andy. But that's just me personally. I think he not only looked the part, but he also was able to capture all the other eccentricities of the character and the seedier aspects of him and the selfish nature of his character and just how manipulative he is and honestly how much of a gross figure he is at the end of the day, despite all of his talents. Um, Hayden Christensen as Billy Quinn, the musician who's based on Bob Dylan. I don't think he was as bad as some critics made him out to be at the time, but it wasn't a great performance. It was definitely interesting. It was interesting to see Hayden Christensen try to do this Bob Dylan voice and mostly failing for the majority of the screen time, but every now and then it kind of sounds halfway convincing. I think it would have been better off if he wasn't even trying to act like or sound like Bob Dylan. Like he's already this different character called Billy Quinn anyway, so why does it have to be Bob Dylan or Bob Dylan-esque? And I don't buy Hayden Christensen as a Bob Dylan-esque type of musician anyway. Like when I found out he was supposed to be Bob Dylan, I'm like, Bob Dylan never looked that good. Even when Bob Dylan was young, he never looked that good. Jimmy Fallon plays Chuck Ween, who's this guy who supposedly is there to help Eddie and be her friend, but he turns out to be a total leech and a total jerk off who uses her and manipulates her just as much as Warhol did. And that character would work a lot better if you had a completely different actor playing that role. I do not buy Jimmy Fallon in this role. It was just miscasting. He looked like he was just doing an SNL skit with all the different wigs, and it just I didn't buy it. I didn't buy him playing this manipulative character. I don't think he has that range. So that was definitely one of the weaker aspects of the cast of Jimmy Fallon. Jack Huston as Gerald. I thought he was fine. So is Tara Summers as Bridget, or Mena Suvari as Richie. James Naughton is Fuzzy Sedgwick, Eddie's father, um, or Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who played Ingrid Superstar. That was definitely one of her more interesting performances and roles, to be honest. Don Novello, it was cool to see him because I remember him from SNL. Played Father Guido Sarducci, so it was fun to see him play a different character. Patrick Wilson has a very small role as a character named John Cale, and by Patrick Wilson I mean the co-founding member and drummer of Weezer. Like, yeah, he's a band member of Weezer is actually in this movie in a small role. Um, you also have Brian Lane Bell, who also is a part of Weezer, who plays Lou Reed. And you have Samantha Maloney, who was a part of Hole and Motley Crue. She plays a character named Maureen Tucker. So that's you definitely have some like famous musicians that are in the cast. You also have Edward Herman, who was in The Lost Boys and Richie Rich. He plays James Townsend, who is Eddie's lawyer, who's like overseeing her inheritance. And you also have Mary Kate Olsen as Molly Spence. So yeah, one of the Olsen twins is in this, and like almost blink and you miss it kind of cameo. Now, the cinematography by Michael Grady at points is pretty groovy and fits the '60s aesthetic. Other times, though, it doesn't really match the time period or the era that they're trying to really bring to life. And other times it's just kind of not really that impressive. It's another one of those things where it's just kind of there, along with the editing by Dana E. Globerman. There are some points where the scenes can kind of glob together a little bit, but then there's other moments where the scenes have a good amount of punch to them, thanks to some some pretty tight and peppy editing. The music by Edward Shearer, completely in one ear, out the other kind of stuff. Forgive me there for apparently I can't speak properly, but yeah, in one ear, out the other kind of stuff. That's really not that memorable and doesn't really add a whole lot to the overall film. I don't think the original score was used that much anyway. I think they just used a lot of like songs that were actually from around the same time period. Uh, and it's like 99 minutes, but it does drag at points, especially in the first half. But I would say it's not anywhere near as awful as its critical reputation suggests. This is not a 20% on Rotten Tomatoes bad kind of film. I know that there were some people who knew Andy that absolutely hated this script. I mean, Lou Reed, the singer-songwriter of the Velvet Underground and one of the factory people who knew Eddie, hated it. He said, "I read that script. It's one of the most disgusting, foul things I've ever seen by any illiterate retard in a long time." And by the way, I'm quoting him. I'm not that's Lou Reed who said that. There's no limit to how low some people will go to write something to make money. I'm like, I don't think it's that bad, Lou. Um, and then Bob Dylan was not happy about it because he thinks that the script insinuated his responsibility in Cedric's drug abuse and then her eventual death. But Sienna Miller, she defended the script, rightfully so, against Dylan's allegations because she said it blames Warhol more than anyone because he did abandon her. There was a friendship there. She needed help and no one helped her. It's not that Dylan drove her to heroin addiction. And yeah, the film doesn't even say that. So Bob Dylan was just assuming something that wasn't even there when it comes to the overall script in the film. So yeah, I would say if you're a fan of Andy Warhol or you're a fan of these kind of biographical films and you want to see something a little bit different and you want to see some two really strong powerhouse performances by a couple actors, uh, this is definitely worth at least one watch. But if none of these things really interest you that much, I can definitely say it's something you could skip because you're not really going to be missing that much at the end of the day. It's a film that I think is worth watching just for some of the direction and the two strong performances by the two leads. But other than that, there's not a whole lot beyond those elements to really make this into something that is that strong or memorable or iconic like Andy Warhol's pop art is to this day. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of Factory Girl, and until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.